Hey guys, and welcome back to the 5th episode of the Capoeira Connection Podcast. Today we sit down with Colin Van Ert, a.k.a. Graduado Gafanhoto of Capoeira Nago, owner of Grasshopper Fitness and Nutrition Coaching here in Austin, Texas. Gafanhoto is a certified personal trainer, nutrition coach, and strength and conditioning coach. And today we discuss the importance of strength and conditioning for the everyday capoeirista. We hope you enjoy. I guess first of all, what's your graduation in capoeira? Your acordo in capoeira in your group and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm just first graduado level in Capoeira Nago, and I got that back in 2015.
Awesome. And where were you practicing at the time?
I was practicing in Milwaukee at the time. I just recently got back from living in Brazil for a while, and I had been home for a while and practicing and teaching in Milwaukee. And then I went out to New York for the Bachillerato with Mestre Andre and Contramestre Tuhasha, and then that's when I got it.
That's his brother, right?
Yeah.
Tuhasha,
Yeah, those are the Guzmão brothers.
Yeah. Dude, insane capoeira too.
Yeah, insane capoeira, terrifying giant balls of muscle flying around the roda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was in 2000 what?
2015.
2015.
Mm-hmm.
So the last time that I was in New York for capoeira was in 2005.
Wow.
And that was the second time, maybe second or third time, I think, that I had been to an event with Mestre Pequinês.
Uh-huh.
And growing up and like starting to see him on the internet when YouTube and stuff was coming out,
Sure.
was incredible, man. His capoeira has always been like his way of movement it seems very efficient and fluid and like insane body awareness. And then breaking down just like the martial prowess of capoeira, he has a really good demonstration of that.
Absolutely.
It's hard to argue like, oh no, capoeira is not effective. Jiu-jitsu and this is like, okay, well, let me show you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, and I really appreciate his approach to it too, because he'll show you, he understands limitations of it as well. And it's like, he'll show you up until the point that capoeira can be super effective, and he can show you that understanding and prowess of, you know, the martial aspects of the game. And what I love about his teaching in Nago is like they find a way to incorporate those aspects a little bit more without losing the other elements of capoeira that make it so beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's something too, whereas like a lot of people, I think they have trouble delineating certain aspects within the game itself, and then other things get lost. Whereas, you know, things can just break down, and then all of a sudden it's like you're not watching capoeira anymore, you're just watching two people fight.
Right.
And like, you know, it's entertaining on a certain level, but
yeah, you might as well shut the beating bells down.
Yeah, like we don't need
3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah, exactly. Just start placing bets and like let's see what's happening.
Yeah.
But they have a way of kind of incorporating that and continuing like the energy and not having things break down most of the time.
Yeah, and both of those dudes, I'm speaking about Andre and Pequinês, are extremely physically fit.
Yeah.
They're not just like good martial artists. They're very fit, very active, super flexible.
Sure.
You know, it's incredible. And the very first time that I met Mestre Pequinês was in 1997 or 98, maybe. And he came, I think he was working with Dance Brazil and Mestre Gelon.
Oh, sure.
And he came through to a Batizado in San Antonio. And he came and did a workshop with our group in Austin. And in fact, he did the workshop at the same place where Contramestre Esquilo is giving classes right now at the Austin Recreation Center.
Okay.
And that was the first time, man, I must have been, I don't even want to do the math, 98, 99. I was like 16, something like that, 15. And that was the first time I had ever seen in person that caliber of capoeira. I was like, this can't possibly be real. I was like, there must be some secret island where people like this exist, you know? That was insane. And then, you know, some years later, going to New York and meeting him there, he's a really chill guy, you know, to talk to. I mean, I've seen some videos, and it's like some pretty hardcore videos of his capoeira and rodas and stuff like that, which are extreme cases, but really friendly dude, man.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. And Andre as well. I did some workshops with him there, and then they had like a big roda, I think in Central Park, or I don't remember where their roda was, but yeah, really, really cool. But again, both look like they have a good amount of background in strength and conditioning, as well as capoeira.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the Nago sort of methodology, is that it's very physical. And the type of physical training they do, it's very militant, and they want people to be just as committed to developing their physical capacities as their other capacities as a capoeirista. So you go to a class and it's intense, man. I mean, I've seen some workshops where Andre will come through to another city, and then, you know, we got a bunch of different groups coming in, and people are like 15 minutes in, they're like, oh my God, like I didn't know what I signed up for.
Just like physically demanding.
Yeah, and it's straight from the get-go. Like they want high energy, they want high intensity the whole time. And that's a big part of the foundation of what you see when you watch someone like Mestre Pequenês. Like, you know, he has such a serious physical discipline as well as everything else. But at the same time, I mean, you touch on that. I look at how good they are in the Roda and like how intensely they train. And Andre, who's a fighter as well and fought for the UFC, you know, you'd think that they have all this aggression pent up and they're just like these angry guys, and that's why they train so hard. But it's almost like they train so hard and it makes them much more chill. Like hanging out with Andre, super relaxed, super chill. Meanwhile, he could kill you at any moment.
Yeah.
And like same thing with Pequenês, but like just relaxed guys. And I think part of that is just how hard they train. It's like a big release, and then that kind of, you can see their personalities get to relax after that.
Yeah. I saw also, I think, recently, geez, maybe within the last year or something like that, I think Andre moved to Miami.
Yeah.
He moved from New York to Miami. And there's a ton of capoeira there, too. And I see he does, like, I think he's doing some kind of, like, MMA classes.
Yeah.
Some kind of physical fitness, and then capoeira as well. Yeah,
he's teaching capoeira. He's also he's a jiu-jitsu black belt under Renzo Gracie, and so he's teaching.
That's a huge accomplishment, man.
Yeah,
I don't practice jiu-jitsu, but I follow everything about it.
Of course,
you know, because I love like Joe Rogan's podcast and all that stuff, UFC. So Renzo Gracie is the shit.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, he's awesome. I met him in New York very briefly, and same thing, man. You got these guys that are straight killers, and they're super nice.
Yeah.
Just like, I think it's sort of this misconception about martial artists and fighters that they're all kind of like angry meatheads and they're super aggressive, and there's that. But I think for the most part, if you're going to achieve a high level of anything, there's some level of humility and like groundedness that has to be there. And I think they understand that. I think there's like a certain number of ass kickings you probably have to go through on your way to get there. So they all understand.
Yeah. It's funny you touch on humility. You know, one thing that I see, and maybe it's just my perception, but it's lost a little bit of its tangibility, is the in the practice of capoeira is like honor, right? I mean, when you say honor in conjunction with martial arts, you think of like some kind of Japanese samurai, you know, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then just the word honor has a lot of like intangible capacities within it too, right? But there's several capoeiristas, and I include Mestre Pequenês in this, that really kind of display that effort behind not only like why they're teaching, but how.
Yeah.
And then the effect on others. And like you said, like there's a lot of humility, you know, backed by that. And that's always impressed me. I've had very few conversations with Mestre Pequenês, and they're always in Portuguese.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if he speaks English.
A little bit.
A little bit?
He travels a lot in Spanish-speaking countries. So he's fluent in Spanish, fluent in Portuguese, and he's got enough Portuguese-speaking people that he doesn't need to learn English right now.
Yeah, I would love to have him on the podcast as well. But yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, that's definitely something that stands out, and there's not a whole bunch of people who I can say, oh yeah, honor is one of their main priorities when like conducting the art or like disseminating knowledge. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because there's like many other faucets to like teach, and sometimes I feel like that one's kind of like left on the back burner.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're touching on is this idea of like, you know, in the development of a practice, like the greater thing is the development of a person.
Right.
And like
100%.
And like the, you know, someone who's like a true capoeirista, like there's a certain level of, you're hoping that this person is on their path to become a better person. And like, I think with Mestre Pequenês, with Nago, they really push that idea and the idea that this is like a vehicle for change. And I think people understand that intuitively, but maybe don't express it. And so, just making that, acknowledging that, and then keeping that in your practice as like, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to throw these 100 armadas today just to like improve my armada. But at the same time, that diligent practice is a part of this greater practice of like, I'm trying to develop into this better person. And that's the honor.
Mental fortitude.
Exactly.
And, yeah, man.
Yeah.
That's really, amazing. I remember, so I started martial arts when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I was probably 7 years old, and I practiced karate. Yeah. And, man, sometimes I think, it wasn't my mom that put me in karate, but she was a single parent. And I know that in those karate classes, 60% of what I learned wasn't karate. Right. It was just discipline. Yeah. It's like get a kid to respect their elders, listen to somebody, and pay attention and, pretty much not be a jackass when you're at home. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's really important for a single mother. And I want to see... I want to see those same kind of values instilled in capoeira, and sometimes I don't. Yep. And I've run a kids program before for several years, and I taught them the same way that I would teach, or the same way that I was taught in karate, and it was very like not militant or strict, but definitely not like there's no guidelines. There were guidelines. Right. It's like when kids come in, you have like a little piece of tape on the floor and every kid has like their station. Yeah. Because sometimes you say, okay, guys, line up. And it's like a group of kids are all in front of the mirror.
They're like, what's a line?
Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's like little things like this or like routine. Okay, guys, we're going to do jumping jacks. We're going to do a couple of sit-ups. We're going to stretch a little bit. And then and that was really important for me growing up. And also kind of like distinguishing who my mentors were by way of just of them being an example.
Sure.
How did you find capoeira? How did you even start doing capoeira?
So I started capoeira my sophomore year at college. I've always lived pretty physically, just like, I had a ton of energy growing up and I was like really all over the place, very ADHD. And so I would channel it through doing a lot of things like sports and just being physical, snowboarding. And then I got to college and I didn't have team sports anymore. And I was just looking for outlets. And they had these sport and rec classes that you could take. And I got really into yoga. I was looking through and I'd always been attracted to martial arts. I'd always loved martial arts movies and it was always something that I was drawn to, but I never really pursued as a kid or my parents never pushed me towards it. I remember I was going through and I was looking through the available course options for this fall semester of my sophomore year, and I saw capoeira as an option, and I was like, "What the fuck is capoeira?" And so I YouTube it, and I just see these haldas of, which I didn't even know were haldas at the time, just these circles of people and people flying and flipping around. I'm like, "Oh, this is my thing that I'm going to do," and it was like pretty much I knew right away. So I started taking that class. And it was this Angola class taught by a guy who, in all fairness, he had done it previously and he had really good intentions, but it was terrible instruction. He couldn't even do a hole. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't really jinga, but he was teaching the class. And that's all I needed, just the littlest taste of just getting on my hands, doing AU and like working on handstands. And I was hooked. We didn't even get to play during an entire semester.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So my first introduction was like the most minimal, absolutely nothing in it. But it was enough for me. It was enough to like see the light. And from there, I started searching for groups in town. And I found Capoeira Nago, which was being taught by my first instructor, Graduado Sapo. And I started taking classes with him. And then when I got with him, the doors opened up. He was a great teacher. Very intellectual person.
Brazilian, American?
American. He's also from Milwaukee.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so he's from Milwaukee. He started doing capoeira. I think, how long had he been doing it for? I'm not sure how long he had been doing it at that time, but he had gotten his Graduado cord a few years before under Andre. Moved back to Milwaukee, and there was a group there. It was a Mukulele group. And then
Messi Fran. Capoeira Makulele?
Yeah, it was under Mestre Fran, but it was Mestre Azulão who was there temporarily. And then things kind of broke apart, and then there was a bunch of capoeiristas, and they were looking for somebody to, take the reins. Things were in disarray. So then Sapo was the highest ranking student at the time, and he was going to take over, but if he was going to do it, he was going to do it Nago. So he got the approval of Andre and started Capoeira Nago Milwaukee. And so I found them, and it was just like
game changer.
Yeah, it was everything. I mean, Sapo is a super fun guy. If you ever meet him, he's super crazy, loves to party, and like just knows how to like hold space for people and have a good time. So we had our own little capoeira family, and we just trained all the time, trained really hard, partied a lot, and that was my introduction into it. And so that's how I found it. I just like fell in love immediately and just didn't stop. Everything kind of started revolving around capoeira. At the time, I was trying to figure out like what I was doing for school. I was undeclared in terms of my major for a while, but I realized that I loved studying different cultures and language. So I became a global studies major, and I started learning Portuguese in school. And then I was like, well, global studies, you have to travel for, you have to get some time abroad. So I'm like, I'm going to Brazil, and everything just funneled in, and it like just locked in on this capoeirista path even more.
And that was I want to touch on this too. That was funny. We just figured this out when you came over before we started the podcast, that we lived in the same place.
Yeah, we lived in Florianopolis.
Yeah, that's wild, man.
And it's crazy too, man. I'm just like, it's amazing how things kind of happen that way, because I knew I was going to go to Brazil. It was part of my program for school, as I had to go abroad. I'm like, well, I'm going to go to Brazil, of course.
How long did they require you to be abroad? And
just a semester.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just have to get like a certain amount of credits.
Did you study at UFSC? Or were you studying?
No, not at UFSC. I was at a small business school called Unisul.
Oh, okay, yeah, Unisul.
Yeah. So I was there doing their business and language program.
Okay.
And it was really cool, really relaxed. Honestly, not a lot of studying, a lot of just like hanging out in Florianopolis.
Yeah. Surfer style.
Yeah, totally. And but it was great. I mean, like it's amazing how I ended up there. Another friend of mine who was also an international student was looking at abroad programs, and I hadn't even done that much research. I'm like, yeah, I'll go. I'll figure it out, whenever. And then he was like, have you probably heard of this place called Florianopolis? And he showed me this program. I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And
dude, how could it not be cool on an island?
I know.
And in the south of Brazil, you're like,
I just had no concept. But the more I looked into it, I was like, wow, this is the place.
Yeah.
So and then everything funneled in. That was my last semester, and I finished up in Brazil.
How long were you there?
I was in Florianopolis for 5 months, and then I moved to Goiânia. So another part of being an international studies major is like you also have to do an international internship. And I knew I wanted to train capoeira. I really wanted to go to Goiânia, spend some time with Mestre Pequenês and all the people that live there, and like see how it really went down.
Yeah. Or the roots of like your group. And
exactly.
I did very much the same thing with kind of studying my mastery as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm like, well, I'm going to make that happen. So I actually, I set up my own internship, more or less, where I just contacted my group. And I'm like, hey, if I have you guys sign off on these papers, will you tell my school that I'm doing a capoeira internship for you? And so that's actually how I finished school. Was I went to Goiânia, and I was getting credit as an intern for Capoeira Nago, and that's how I got my degree.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, take notes, people.
Yeah, it's for sure. I mean, honestly, that I did learn a lot in that regard. It was like, it was just something that I wanted to do, and I'm a big believer that if you have something you want to do and you ask the right questions, you can probably do it.
Yeah.
So that was a big example for me of like, oh yeah, there's a lot more that you can do if you're willing to ask the questions and then do the work.
And how long were you in Goiânia for?
2 months.
2 months?
Yeah.
In Floripa, did you play much capoeira? You just mostly like hanging out?
I played a little bit.
Yeah.
I played a little bit with, there were a bunch of CDO groups there.
Yep.
And I would go to some classes. I met this guy who was
Diogo.
there.
Did you ever meet Master Diogo?
No.
I think that's his name.
I think there was Professor Galo who was there.
Okay.
He was a little bit south. I had a bike at the time, so I like bike 20 minutes south and get to his classes. There was this French guy that I met that was living there at the time, and it was interesting too because I met him. All the international students got together and they played like this World Cup soccer match.
Oh, cool.
And we made all these different teams.
All the gringos playing soccer.
Yeah, totally. It was hilarious. And it was great. Really fun. But I remember watching this guy, and all of a sudden his legs were like flying out to the side, and he like kind of like fell, but he like caught himself on his hands, rolled out. I'm like, that guy's a fucking capoeirista. And I could tell right away. And then I talked to him afterwards. I'm like, do you play capoeira, man? And he's like, yeah, I do. I train a little bit south. I was like, great. And then he was my introduction to like the scene there.
Yeah.
So I would train a little bit, but only like once or twice a week, and then just stuff, playing by myself.
Yeah.
Keeping things fresh.
Yeah.
But not a lot.
What's crazy is there's so I think Florianopolis has maybe 450,000 inhabitants, something like that, maybe 500,000.
Yeah.
There's a huge capoeira scene there.
Yeah, there is.
It's a big capoeira scene. I mean, there was Mestre Falcão with Capoeira Biribazu. And then there's Mestre Cascão, there's Mestre Tigre, there's Mestre Pinóquio.
And there were a couple times I went to a Holda with Mestre Tigre.
Yeah.
And in the center of town.
Yep.
Yeah, I went there a couple times.
Every Saturday morning.
Yeah. And that was really cool.
Yeah.
They're definitely like, my first introduction was, of course, like, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah.
Strolling through. But everyone's super, super warm, super welcoming.
Yeah.
Didn't get my head taken off, so that was nice.
Yeah. They have a tough roda. There's also a Capoeira Abadá that has a roda there. Mm-hmm. And I spent time kind of going around to all the rodas. But yeah, the first 6 months was like a learning curve, man.
Yeah.
It was like just trying not to get black eye in every roda, you know?
Yeah, it was really cool. I did have I think it was Professor Galo who had Mestre Jogo de Gentro comigo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I got to do a workshop with him. He was there for a few days, and that was very cool. That was probably like the highlight of my capoeira experience in Florianopolis, just to see someone of that caliber, and like you see somebody who's a mestre of that degree, and it's great. And Angoleiro too, it's like Mestre Pequenês, it's everything super refined and big and powerful and fast. But when you see somebody who's like an Angoleiro and a mestre of that degree and has that much time put into capoeira, the tiniest movements you can just recognize this years of skill and understanding. And then he grabs the berimbau and he starts to sing, and you're like, whoa, it hits you hard.
Yeah, another level, man.
Yeah.
It's I think it's it's interesting how newer capoeiristas who are more just like entranced in contemporary capoeira and regional, and that's what they practice or whatever, seeing an Angoleiro or a really good Angola mastery playing to a very quick Angola rhythm.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't understand that, Angola is fast also.
Sure.
And it's like, there's some kicks and things that you're like, whoa, the guy barely got out. And it was like, that can be a knockout too.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, I love watching those kind of games, man. Those are incredible.
Yeah, I do too. And so I always, I don't understand what the people that hate on it, because I think it's so interesting, and it's one of those things where, like, when you're starting out in capoeira, you just don't have the vision. You don't know what you're looking at, and you don't know what you're watching. But as you develop more and you start to see things more, things become so interesting. The nuanced things that set people up, the little movements that like mean everything in a conversation. It becomes really intricate and very interesting.
Yeah.
That's why I like watching. Have you paid a lot of attention to the movimento novo stuff with what's his name? Not Aberama. It's
Is this something on YouTube or?
Yeah, it's a new. So Nestor Capoeira's son is, and I can't believe I can't remember his name right now, but they're doing this thing. It's called Movimento Novo, and they're kind of like very much Angola, but they're moving away from anything hierarchical. So, no group affiliation. It's just people meeting up, and like the music's really good, and the games are really impressive to watch. So if you want a good example of very entertaining and fun Angola to watch, check out the Movimento Novo stuff with I think he's a Tapua. But just look up Movimento Novo, Capoeira, and there's amazing games. And they do a really good job of filming it and sharing it. And that stuff is really, really fun to watch. So it's a good example of like the small intricacies of the game without like things breaking down into a fight, but just seeing this back and forth of, you know, check and balance and like back and forth, really good gameplay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool, man. So after you were done living in Goiânia for 2 months, you came back to the States. You finished up your degree.
My degree was finished in Brazil.
In Brazil, okay.
Yeah, so I just had, the only thing really left for me to do was do a couple credits abroad and to do an internship. And so I did that in Florianopolis, and I did that through Capoeira.
Okay.
And so that's how I finished school.
And then once you came back to the States, what, you know, I'm trying to find a way to your fitness connection.
Oh, sure. So I had already, before leaving for Brazil, I had already gotten into the fitness industry. I was working as a trainer at a gym, and it's interesting too. We were talking a little bit before about like the discipline that comes with training capoeira, and for me, capoeira gave me a lot. Like it's amazing how it came into my life, and it really formed me because I found it and I fell in love with it. And so I was just like, I need to get amazing at this. I need to train all the time whenever I can. And so with that, I was like, I need to get stronger. I need to get faster. And I got really into training. I had already been training. My dad was a big example for me. He worked out all the time on top of working a really demanding job. And we basically had a gym in our basement ever since I could remember. So I started working out at a really young age. And then it was just like, as soon as I had the passion for something, I took it to the next level.
Yeah.
And so I got into capoeira, and I started to have a lot more discipline and regimen around my training. At the same time, there was a trainer in Milwaukee who was really, really world class. He was a really talented trainer, very kind of full of himself, a little bit cocky. Some would say he's kind of a douche, but also my friend. I got to make that distinction as well. He's my friend, but he's a douche. So there's that caveat. But really, really amazing trainer, and he was really drawn to things like movement. He was really drawn to capoeira. So as I was getting involved with that, he wanted to see what was going on with capoeira. And so he kind of took me under his wing and showed me a lot of things around training, a lot of things that you're probably going to not see in typical fitness industry, things coming from some of the best teachers. So I got to bypass a lot of crappy fitness by working with this guy. So he taught me a lot coming up, and then I just really fell in love with that. And through that, I was able to get a position at a gym working as a part-time trainer while going to school. And so I built up a clientele, and I just realized the amount of freedom that you can have when you have your own clientele. And though you work for a gym, you kind of technically run your own business and your own enterprise. So I did that, and then when I came back, I just realized I could pick it up, and I could maintain a lot of freedom in my life by continuing the path of fitness and working with people and essentially not getting into any type of 9-to-5 job. So that was a big thing for me. I came back to the States, and I hopped into fitness, and I started working at the same gym, started building my clientele again. And that was a way for me to maintain the freedom and, you know, maneuverability. And like if I want to go and travel to a workshop, if I want to go and just go on vacation for a few days, I don't have to ask anybody for time off. I just go.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. And then another aspect of it too, I had just started dating my now girlfriend who I met in Brazil. And she lived in Kentucky. And so I sort of needed that for like the relationship. So a big part of it was like this lifeline of having fitness allow me to have freedom and control.
Yeah.
And then I really, really love it. So like the physical discipline of it, and like I really nerd out on the science of strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
And so it just worked. And it's been a struggle, and like you gotta fight, and like sometimes things aren't going your way. Sometimes the money's not there, but ultimately it's a really good lifestyle and something that like just supports everything else that I have going on.
Yeah. So I guess like the biggest reason I was excited to have you on the podcast, because we've only met a handful of times, and talked a few times at Barton Springs. But what I was really excited about was the strength and conditioning aspect, especially for capoeiristas, because I think it's a huge thing. And just going back on my own personal history, man, I didn't find strength and conditioning soon enough.
Sure.
I have I've torn both of my ACLs. I did one, I think, when I was like 18 years old. I did another one about probably almost exactly a year, maybe year and a half after that. And it was probably because I was like walking unbalanced, giving more, like pressure on one leg than the other, and like weakening one knee. Dislocated a shoulder, ended up having to have like an anchor put in here. I had like a lot of injuries, man.
Yeah.
And I'd be lying if I didn't say that like that didn't slow me down a lot in my capoeira and training, and like just redeveloping flexibility and even being able to like squat down and or going through like an hour or 2 hours of training or a workshop or something and not have my knees like swell up.
Right.
I mean, I still deal with like repercussions, but just getting into like, man, and actually seeing and applying the importance of strength and conditioning for capoeira.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of people. I see a handful of people do that, but I'm not talking about going to the Globo gym and doing bicep curls.
Right.
I'm talking about actual like dynamic strength and conditioning training, not working out, and applying that to capoeira is so important.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want to stress in this podcast and kind of talk about that. Hear your opinion, especially as a capoeirista,
Yeah, and I'm really excited that we're able to talk about this because I think it's huge. I think it's immensely important. I had a friend when I was teaching in Milwaukee, and I was teaching these classes, and I would do a lot of strength and conditioning in the classes. I would do a lot of conditioning because it was, in my wheelhouse, and I thought it was appropriate. And this is when I was younger, and he was talking to me after class, and he's like, you do a lot of like strength movements and stuff, but like I think you should just train people to get stronger with capoeira, and like you should just do it with the movements. And at the time, I thought, yeah, they kind of make sense. The more training we get, the better. But since that time, I realized I think that's really really poor advice. The strengthening, conditioning, like that needs to be a separate thing that supports your skill practice, that supports your movement practice, because in those moments of intense lifting or resistance training or flexibility work, that's your time to be very deliberate, to isolate particular movement, and to break things down in a way in a very controlled environment so that you know the outcome. Whereas if you are simply doing floreios all the time, and maybe you have a weakness somewhere in one part of your body, then you have these compensations and other muscles are taking over that they shouldn't really be involved. Then your body's not going to learn sort of the kinesthetic knowledge that it needs to do that move more efficiently. It's gonna compensate to complete the task, but it won't build up the right capacity to do it in such a way that it's very efficient and it doesn't break down your body. So the strength and conditioning piece is huge because that's your opportunity to move away from that, build up the balance and build up these weaknesses so that when you go into your skill practice, you can just focus on the skill, and that doesn't have to be your conditioning, because what's going to happen during that moment is that you're going to break down, you're going to fatigue, and certain parts of the body that have a certain task to fulfill, whether that's rotating your shoulder back and supporting it, keeping it in place, or if it's supporting your low back and make sure that your glutes are turned on so that your pelvis isn't anteriorly tilted forward, creating this sort of low back pain that I see a lot of capoeiristas have.
I was about to say that's exactly my problem. Like my pelvis sits back like this.
Sure.
And I have to if I'm not squeezing my abs or my glutes to have it like this so that my spine is straight, I have a lot of lower back pain.
So that's one thing I really want to talk about today. But going back to the strength and conditioning piece, generally speaking, you need to have that separate, because that's your opportunity to build yourself up and sort of build the machinery and hardware for the more technical stuff. Because in that more technical time, when you're doing, if you're doing a parafuso, you're not thinking about engagement of the muscles. You're thinking about technicality of the skill. And a few misconceptions people are going to have is if you do too much strength and conditioning training, you're going to lose flexibility. Mm-hmm. It's going to ruin some of your skill. That's only if you do it incorrectly. If you really focus on form and doing things full range of motion, and you have a certain aptitude towards it, it's only going to make you better. So I just want to drive that home. But like for capoeiristas in general, there's a handful of problems that we see kind of ubiquitously that need to be addressed. And one is this thing that you talk about, which is like the low back pain, which I dealt with for a long time. And it was one of the reasons I had to slow down in capoeira as well, because it was just my low back would light up. And that's something that happens pretty regularly. So I'd be happy to get into like, sort of remedying that and some of the movement things that we see in capoeira that we can improve through strength and conditioning. And so with that in particular, what that is generally it's associated to this thing we call lower cross syndrome. And lower cross syndrome is this thing that happens in our low back. It equates to low back pain. It happens when we have an anterior pelvic tilt.
Which in layman terms mean what? Like you stick your butt out kind of?
Kind of. It's, I like to say it's the Instagram butt, and you're popping your Instagram butt out for the pictures. But another way of looking at it is that if your pelvis is a glass full of water, it's spilling out to the front.
Gotcha.
So it's tipped forward.
Yep.
And so what happens with this is that your spinal erectors on your lower back get really, really tight. Your hip flexors, which are connected to the top of your thighs, and then your pelvis, get really short and tight as well. And that's another thing too, because we throw things like armadas and we throw all these front kicks where we snap our leg up really fast, our hip flexors get really, really tight. So our hip flexors get really tight. Our glutes actually turn off. And it's not just that like your glutes are working to an extent, right? But you got to understand that there's different muscle. Like when we say glutes, there's the glute medius, there's the glute minimus, there's glute maximus, and there's all these other tiny little muscles that stabilize and help externally rotate our thighs and stabilize that pelvis so that the pelvis is stable. And now all of a sudden the vertebrae doesn't get loaded. So again, with this lower cross syndrome, another thing that happens is the glutes actually turn off a lot. And we think that we have strong, powerful glutes in capoeira. We do to an extent, but our external rotators are weak. And so we don't have stability in our pelvis. And then that's when you feel that low back pain. So that is something that I see rampant in capoeira. And
You mean just that posture?
That posture, and it comes from the ginga. So biggest thing that we can do is to bend that back leg in your ginga. Just a little bend in the knee. And then all of a sudden that tuck in the pelvis levels out. And I used to have a very straight leg in my ginga for the longest time, and I have to rewire it within me to just bend the leg a little bit. But if you think about it, if that back leg is straight, all of a sudden the hips have to rotate forward a little bit. And then that's where the butt sticks out.
To compensate for that line, right?
Exactly.
Whereas like you bend it and you're...
Exactly. So it brings it underneath. And then if you do that, you can do that. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you can do it right now. You can stand up into a lunge position, straighten your back leg, and you're going to notice how your low back right above your butt gets really tight. And you're going to feel your glutes turn off. If you bend that knee and go into more of what we think of as a typical lunge, the glutes turn on a little bit more. So that's the biggest one in terms of form, I would say. If you're working on that ginga, do yourself a favor and bend the back knee. But then, in terms of strength and conditioning, there's a bunch of things that we can do as well. There's certain things we can do to remedy this. So the first one would be to, one, strengthen our glutes. Because of all the lunging type of movements that we do in capoeira, we become very quad dominant. So I'm attesting it because I got these big, massive quads that take over very regularly. So I think if you're going to do a strength and conditioning move to help you improve your ginga and help with firing your glutes a little bit more, you need to do a rear foot elevated split squat or a Bulgarian split squat. There's ways of doing this correctly and incorrectly. But looking up that movement, you'll see very quickly that it's a lunge pattern, and it replicates what we want to see in a good ginga, which is the hips are stable in a strong position, and it's very much going to fire your glutes. If you're doing this exercise and you're too erect and you're feeling it towards your knee and your quad, then you're just contributing to further quad dominance, and you're going to contribute to a lack of glutes firing. So rear foot elevated split squat, I think, is one of the best ways a capoeirista can train their lower body. With that, we have to address other certain things. One would be the tightness in the hip flexors. So this includes rectus femoris, or not rectus femoris. This includes our regular iliopsoas, our iliacus, and then our big, it is rectus femoris, on top of the quads. Rectus femoris on top of the quads. And so we have to lengthen that out, and your best bang for your buck stretch for that is something called the couch stretch.
I was just going to say that. I do that every day.
Couch stretch is huge.
Yep.
Which essentially is similar to a rear foot elevated split squat. You're going to be in a lunge pattern. Basically, your back foot is up on it's up on an elevated surface, and then the back knee is down. And then from there, it's this idea of tucking the tailbone once again, and then so we flatten out the butt, and then you push forward, and then you just lengthen out through the hip flexors.
Getting in that position, you can even do it on a wall, right? Have your foot on the wall and knee on the ground. Just trying to get your chest up is like fire on your quad.
Yeah, if it hurts, you're doing it right.
Yeah, when getting into it, you can't just just sit up. You got to like ease into it, because otherwise it's like it's painful, man.
Yeah,
you know?
100%. But that one's huge because that just contributes. And the other thing too is like that lower cross syndrome that I talked about. It's all these little things that you kind of have to tackle because one leads into the other. The tight hip flexors will lead into your lower back, and it will lead into the anterior tilt. The quad dominance will lead into the lack of glute strength. So if you can work on it conversely and you can get the glutes strong, the quads will ease up a little bit. If you can lengthen through the hip flexors, then you get rid of the anterior tilt a little bit more. So those are probably the two biggest ones. Doing the rear foot elevated split squat and couch stretch.
Yeah.
And then I would also say that people generally have very weak lower abs. So they're very bad at the posterior tuck. If you can work on that posterior tuck, essentially tucking your tailbone like a dog with its tail between its legs, where your butt scoops underneath and it flattens out, what I call office butt. If you can do the office butt and hold that position, that's also going to be beneficial. So a good exercise for that would be something called the back body line drill. And this would be very similar to just training something like a hollow body position, whereas you emphasize posterior tuck, tucking the tailbone, glutes are firing. And
so like a hollow body position, you're talking about like laying on your back, almost so your lower back is on the ground, and you're kind of making almost like a taco.
Yes.
With your body, right? Shoulders off the ground.
Yep.
Legs straight out, kind of folded up like this.
Yeah, and so the exercise I'm talking about is sort of a precursor to that. You could look up also dead bugs. Dead bugs are great.
Yep. With your legs and arms in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So the back body line drill, how you're going to set this one up is you would fly flat on your back. You would take your legs, and they're going to go up straight towards the ceiling. Arms are going to go up straight towards the ceiling. So you're lying on your back. Both hands and feet are moving straight toward the ceiling. From there, you reach up towards the ceiling with your head, neck, and shoulders so that your upper shoulders come up off the back, and all of a sudden you have a very strong connection of your low back to the ground. Mm-hmm. Now, as soon as you do that, you feel your low abs turn on. So from there, if you can maintain that, you keep your low back down, then you just open up your hands and your legs, your arms and your legs a little bit, and maintain that connection to the ground while keeping your tailbone tucked. And that's how you target your low abs. If you do this, you feel it immediately, and then you just try to hold it. If you can hold it for up to a minute and do that, I don't know, a handful of times a week, it helps a lot.
It's interesting too how when we say tight core, everybody associates core with abdominals. It's my abs.
Right.
But core is everything but your extremities.
Yeah.
Right? Low back, upper back, abdominals, lats, all that kind of stuff is very, very important.
And if we want to be functional in our approach to this, we also want to include the idea of it's not just the trunk, but it's the trunk's connection to the extremities. It's not just your ability to stabilize, but it's your ability to stabilize and transmit force through the trunk. So, like for instance, a great example is throwing a punch. The punch is people quite generally, you ask them, they're like, all right, like what do you need to be strong if you want to throw a good punch? And a lot of them will be like, well, you should have a big chest and shoulders and, your arms should be super strong. The reality is you probably have some really wicked hips. It starts from the floor. You're generating force from your feet, and then you're rotating through the hips. And then there's this thing that happens where that force has to transmit from your hips in that rotation. It goes through your torso, then through the shoulders, and then out the arm. And so that's the full thing. It's a full body whip. And so you need that. But like there's that whole connection of like, if you don't have a strong core, there are many places that force gets lost. It can get lost in your hips, the connection of your legs to your trunk. It can get lost in your trunk because you don't have good strength there. It can get lost in your connection of the trunk to the shoulders. So big, broad definition of core. If you want to do yourself a favor, stop thinking about it in terms of just your abdominals. Think about it in terms of everything that stabilizes your trunk and everything that helps you transmit force from your trunk to the extremities, or vice versa.
Yeah. So going back to a couple of the issues I had, and then trying to find like the starting point for those issues. The main thing that affected me were my knees. Sure. And so the first movement you were mentioning was the kind of the back foot elevated split squat. Yep. Squats are something that I think have like dramatically changed just the overall strength of my body and conditioning for my knees. Sure. You know. And then another thing you mentioned was full range of motion. You know, like you see guys in the gym doing like squats like barely to like parallel like 90 degrees. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Your muscle range of motion is like far exceeds that. Why are you going to limit your strength training to that kind of like micro movement? So that's something. And also it's people are like, oh no, but squats hurts my knees. Well, you're probably doing the squats incorrectly. Probably. Right? Yeah. I think what causes most of the knee pain, especially like in the patella, is extending your knees forward when you squat instead of your hips back. And I think in general, like a good rule of thumb for people who are just starting out squatting is when you're in a squat position, aside from keeping your, maintaining a tight back and a straight back, is making sure that your knees don't go beyond your toes. Yeah. Right? Weight in your heels. And that's something that, first starting out, because I had weak legs, squats were really tough for me. Sure. Really hard. Yeah. But it became one of my favorite movements. And that's when I first started realizing, like, man, every time that I go to the gym in my younger years, it was all for aesthetic gains. Sure. Just the way I look. Oh, biceps, chest, abs, whatever. Yeah. And now that I'm approaching 40, I'm 35, but moving in that direction, the last thing I care about is aesthetics. Sure. I want like function. Yeah. Something that's going to keep my body feeling good and moving well. Right. So squats and deadlifts. Huge. For like my posterior chain, right? Glutes, hamstrings, lower back. Those are two strengthening movements that I think like drastically changed the way that I felt while I was doing capoeira. But then going back and talking about why did my knees develop, or like, why did I end up having weak knees or joints or something like that? Well, number one was, I think, not finding strength and conditioning much sooner. Sure. Or like this kind of style of like functional strength and conditioning. But it was also the way I trained. Yeah. And overtraining and repetition of movement that at the time, like maybe I would have some joint pain, but I was like, oh, I just need to work through it. But that's not the right answer. No, you should not work through painful movement. No. And that's something that took me a long time to kind of realize and change with my training now. Yeah. I used to train 5-6 days a week, 2, 3, 4 hours a day, like multiple classes back to back, either teaching or training or something like that. And then I looked back and I was like, man, I put a lot of miles on my joints and ligaments. Like no wonder like I've had these aches and pains and surgeries and stuff like that. Yeah.
In hindsight, it makes a lot of sense, right? You're like, oh, of course. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's huge. And for everyone that's training, I think you got to learn to understand what the minimum effective dose is. You don't need to train for 4 hours. You can do it, but you need to understand the amount of recovery that needs to happen on the back end. Sure. Because every time that we train, there's repercussions to that. It's not just like soreness, but what is soreness? It's muscle damage. It's this buildup of metabolic waste. It is ligament strain. It's a lot of things that need to be moved past. The idea of training is that we give our body a stimulus and we push it just beyond the degree of comfort and just beyond the degree of what it can handle, so that there is this sort of degradation in performance. And we can't continue if you trained really, really hard one day, the idea is if you go in to the gym another 3 hours later, you probably can't do that again. We want to push our body back because we have this thing we call general adaptation syndrome, which is after a short acute stressor, we can then super compensate, and then we come back a little bit more resilient. So, we can
give us an example of an acute stressor.
It's some back squats.
Squats.
When I'm talking about, it could be something cardiovascular, it could be training, it could be an exercise. We can use the back squat example. So that can be the acute stressor of doing these movements, and you create this muscle damage that happens. And so tiny little little tears in the contractile filaments of the muscle. And if you give it the time and everything that it needs, the adequate amount of protein, adequate amount of rest, if you have a good hormonal environment after that training, and you give it the appropriate amount of time, then those filaments can grow back, and they can grow back bigger, and they can even, there's some debate over whether they can actually create more muscle fiber, but generally what's happening is that when we're training for muscular hypertrophy or muscular growth, the muscle fiber just grows in diameter, and the greater diameter it is, the more force we can transmit. So that's an example of like the stressor of the back squat then leads to a degradation in performance, but then our body, given adequate rest and recovery, can then come back better and stronger. So if you're training and you're just running yourself into the ground, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. Whereas like you need to have an adequate balance. We're not training to train, we're training to recover. And we recover better, and we come back the better person, right? So just keeping that in mind, understanding that it's not about working hard, it's not about getting sore. One of my favorite strength and conditioning professionals, Mike Boyle, has this thing that he said on a podcast, which is like, yeah, sure, you want to get sore? Cool. I got a bat in the back of my gym, and like you just tell me where you want to get sore, and I'll just beat the crap out of you, and then tomorrow you'll be sore. And it's like, that's not necessarily your goal. Soreness too, that's another big thing that we need to dispel, is that soreness doesn't equate to muscle hypertrophy. It doesn't equate to muscle growth. It does
to a degree,
right? It's one of the it's indicative of like one of the ways that muscle grows, but it's not. There's 3 different ways that it grows, and that's only one of them. So don't think that you need to be sore every time, and don't think that if you're not sore, if you're not dying from a workout, that's not a good one. Sometimes your body just needs to rest and recover a little bit more. And that's really the biggest thing. It's like train the appropriate amount for you. And especially with something like capoeira, where it's very physically demanding and the skills are very hard, understand what the minimum effective dose is. You don't need to do 1,000 kicks. Not today, at least. Over your lifetime, maybe. But today you need to do 10 really good ones.
So that's where I was hoping you were gonna bring that up, because we have students and when they train, sometimes they're looking for they'll want to do 2 classes back to back, 3 hours of capoeira.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I'm done after an hour and a half class, and I'm beat up. I'm tired. Yeah. And then I started asking myself, okay, are my students just beasts and can just or what's the difference? And then when I start to kind of zone in and hone in on it, the difference is the intensity to which they perform during their training.
Sure.
Right? And it's not you don't have to necessarily put a time domain on it, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but definitely put an intensity. It's every time you're throwing a kick, it needs to be done very well and come from a very good position. So for example, we're all up front and we're all doing ginga in the mirror and we're throwing armadas. And maybe we do 10 or 15 on each side, something like that. Well, most people focus just on the kick, but what I tell my students is every movement has 3 parts. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it needs to come from a very good ginga, an intense ginga. It's not like you're sitting there just kind of moving back and forth in the mirror, and then the kick is the important part. Well, no, it has to come from a good setup. Number one, because it's got to be, you have to create a foundation for it to be applicable of. And if you're not training from an applicable position, like a good ginga, when you get in the HUD, it's not transferable.
Right.
You know? So that's the first thing, is come from a good base. Second is the actual movement. And third is, guess what? Returning back to a good base.
Right.
It's not through the kick and then, I'm done. No, get back in the game and train like that. And so I start to try to approach my students about that and say, guys, you need to change the intensity to which you train. Because if after doing 30 armadas, you don't feel like, one, you got like a workout, or two, like you don't feel some kind of effectiveness of the training, then it's not the training, it's you.
Yeah.
You know? And nobody ever wants to criticize himself. It's that, oh, the program doesn't work. No, this is a bad program. It's usually not the program.
Sure. Yeah, and I do a bunch of general population fitness classes too. And you can tell the people that are busting ass and the ones that are not. And in that environment, it's a little different because we're not doing complicated movement scale.
Right.
We're doing, a squat.
Yeah.
It's up and it's down. It's not like, it's not some setre. It's just not like some big flipping move. But even with that, it is the intensity that you bring into that moment. And the greater the intensity, the less time you need to spend on it.
Right.
And, I'll take it a step further, which is like for us in the strength and conditioning world, intensity is relative to kind of muscular force or engagement, right? So we'll talk about like intensity of a squat, and that generally relates to max effort. So, if you're doing a set of 10, maybe that's like 75% of your max effort if you can only do 10 reps of that. So that's one way we'll talk about intensity. And if we're looking at that lens at capoeira, well, it's like, okay, how hard are you throwing your kicks? How much are you like really putting your strength into these movements? That's a level of intensity. But I think what we're talking about here is more the intensity of focus and like what I really like to get into, which is this idea of intention over intensity, right? So it's not that I want you to throw 10 armada. I want you to throw 10 armada that are just going to be beautiful. I want you to like get yourself into the exact type of every nuanced piece of that movement and then just encapsulate it just for 10 repetitions. Because the problem is when we get into a movement practice that's very complicated and is very multifaceted like capoeira, that movement quality is going to go down the more you train continuously. So I would definitely take an hour session of intense focused training of people putting all of their effort into, a handful of movements and just really, really honing on what it feels like and getting into their bodies, as opposed to them going for 3 hours. And then by that third hour, everything they do looks like shit.
Yeah.
Because you're creating neurological pathways when we're doing these types of movement trainings. And so, there's this idea of like me throwing a mea lua. The idea is concepted in my brain, and then it goes through these neurological pathways to different motor neurons into my body, and it's almost like a river, right? So from the top of the mountain, it goes down and has these little tributaries that it can go to its end destination. Well, I want it to be a one stream direction from top of the mountain down to the end, going down that river, as opposed to going through all these little tributaries. I don't want to have that idea of a mea lua displaced through like different muscle engagements. I want it to be one crisp, clean thing, so that the idea of that kick goes exactly into what I want it to be. So always when you're doing complicated movement practice, do less and just do it so specifically focused on form, so that later, do your conditioning part separately, like we're talking about, and then you can throw those high-level movements in higher volume. But
right.
If you just do a ton of volume, then that movement quality degrades. And let's say a muscle is fatigued that you really need for a particular movement. Well, now I need a different muscle to get involved.
Which is exactly how I tore my ACL the first time.
Sure. What happened?
So it was, we had, intense training, hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah.
My body is shot out, like, very tired. Mm-hmm. And then I go to then we're playing a roda. I'm already exhausted. My muscles aren't firing like they should be.
Yeah.
And I go to do like a parafuso, and a parafuso where you land on the kicking leg, so you over-rotate, right? Yep. And my leg, my foot landed, my shoe gripped a little bit and just spun my knee like this.
Yeah.
But I even felt when I threw the kick that I wasn't engaged. I was, my legs weren't, they weren't like flexing. Mm. I did the movement just out of repetition. I knew how to do the movement, and I thought I could get away with just kind of just jump in the air and turn and do this, and not the case. It's just like, instant torn ACL. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, that's exactly how injuries happen, right?
Totally.
Overtraining, and then it's when you least expect it. And you think that, oh, I'm doing a movement that I've done 1,000 times before, but you do it under fatigue, that's another level.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's like, we're talking about this before, just delineate what is your strength and conditioning and your skill practice. Focus on your skills separately, and then build up the physical capacity to do high volume work in a safer environment. It's kind of this idea, it's similar to relationships where it's like, I think I've seen a lot of people who think that they're going to get everything from capoeira, and they come into it and they're like, yeah, I'm going to get super strong, I'm going to get super flexible, I'm going to get all these movement skills. And it's like, it's the same thing of like a relationship with a person. It's like, oh, I've got my girlfriend, so she's going to be like, she's going to take care of me, she's going to be confidant, she's going to be my social circle. It's like, you can't rely on one person to be everything for you. You aren't going to rely on capoeira to be everything for you.
Yeah.
So just separate that. Like, do your strength and conditioning to support it. Let it be a supplement to your movement and your skill practice. And then when you go into your skill practice, just be super focused on the development of the skill and the technique.
That's another great point, and something that I continually tell my students. But it just doesn't seem like, it's not that I'm not getting through to them, but it's like, and I remember thinking the same way.
Yeah,
it's like, no, I mean, I always tell them the capoeira class is not here for your exercise.
Right.
Like, you're learning a skill.
Yeah.
And you're coming to be very good and focused at something. Like, you're not coming here to get stronger and I hate to say this because I know like there's different levels of why people do capoeira.
Right.
Some people do it for the social aspect. It's like where you find your friends in a social circle. Totally acceptable. Mm-hmm. Some do it because they want some just kind of fun exercise.
Yep.
Right. And then some do it to be capoeiristas. And this is what I'm more interested in. I accept everybody and what they're there for.
Sure.
Though my methodology of teaching and training supports more of the latter. Right. And that's like, I don't do 1,000 push-ups and sit-ups in my capoeira class. No, I'm going to teach you like what your hips need to be doing when you throw martello in your base leg and things like this. Like, very focused on training like an effective martial art. Mm-hmm. And I try to tell my students, guys, if we may get through an hour and a half class and you're not like dead tired, but you need to focus on what you need to be consciously present the whole class and not just like kind of following the leader and throwing kicks and doing your ginga and that makes a huge difference, right? So where I really started to turn my attention away from like exercising capoeira as a form of exercise is I co-owned a CrossFit gym in South Florida for about 5 years. And that's where I really started picking up on the idea of strength training, and then conditioning, and like what that really meant.
Right.
And then how can I incorporate that relationship into capoeira, and what's really the difference and the benefit and things like that. And it's funny how things kind of run parallel because then, Contra Mestre Mechido, I grew up with him doing capoeira. I've known him for 25 years. And now he owns a CrossFit gym and a capoeira studio, and they are side by side, two separate studios, but they're side by side. And he's got, 50 or 60 CrossFit members, and then 50 or so capoeira members.
Yeah.
And guess how many capoeira members do CrossFit? Almost none.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't believe it. The gym is literally next door.
Right.
We're telling you all these things, and we're also like trying to give you examples by like my busted knees and shoulders, and like, and we have out of 50 people, maybe a handful, 6, 7 that also do the CrossFit. And it's like, okay, maybe you don't like CrossFit, that's fine. But there's a gym, at least come over and let me teach you how to do squats and deadlifts and things that are like going to supplement it. Like, don't look for your exercise class in my capoeira class.
Totally.
Yeah.
Lead a horse to water, but you can't necessarily get it to drink, man.
Yeah.
It's a big frustration, but I don't know. I think a handful of people will get it. And like both you and I think I was fortunate in like being really into strength and conditioning as a separate pursuit to capoeira, and then it just was a good supplement to it. But there's like a lot of lessons I had to learn along the way of beating myself up. Yeah. And then understanding that whole idea of self-care and just like, if you want to do this thing, you got to take care of yourself. Yeah. And it's not that like people forget that it's, we're working out and we're training to support the things that we love to do, and so that we can live a good life. And so that's a very important thing to do. And you're not going to get what you want out of a capoeira practice in terms of just the exercise. You can, I mean, it can be that for you, but then something else has to be lost.
Yeah.
You can't get both. So whatever you come to it towards, you just kind of have to realize what that is.
Yeah.
And again, I don't deter anybody who just wants it to be fun exercise. That's great. It's a great form of exercise. Yeah. And we're not saying that capoeira isn't a great way to train the body, because it makes incredible athletes. But at the same time, there are just certain things that, if you want to get good at other aspects of it, if you want to be a high level mover, then that can't be your only form of exercise.
Yeah. I remember when there was one batizado that we brought Mestre a.k.a. from São Paulo.
Yeah.
Amazing capoeirista. But he's like, he expressed to us and reflected a little bit back on like his training over his life in capoeira, right? Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I did a lot of, I don't want to say dumb things, but I did many things in excess. And I think he was even playing with a torn ACL at the time. Oh, wow. And just couldn't get surgery or didn't have means to do it. And then he just kind of like reflected a little bit on like some regrets that he had in forms of like the methods to which he trained. And then the output now, he's like, I got to be really careful. I can't do as much capoeira as and he's like travels all around. I mean, and it's
that's
like
his livelihood.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I was kind of like, wow, I need to start like really thinking about myself as well. I mean, 20, 25 years of this, do I have another 20, 25 years, 30, 40 years left in me to do this? And will I physically be able to even like squat down and stand up? And like, those are the things I think of now as like my longevity.
Yeah,
totally. And unfortunately, I'm already well on the way to like, being less likely to move with ease as I get older, but I'm doing everything I can now to prevent that. And and even like cutting out some training of capoeira, I train maybe 3 days a week.
Sure.
Yeah. So
there is a point too. Like, I mean, someone with your level of skill and you have so much time that's gone into it. At a certain point, the training doesn't have to be as much. With high level athletes, when they're training for the Olympics or something like that, they don't need to train 5 days a week anymore. They do their skill practice and they get better, but it's ingrained. So it's a lot about maintenance and then just them maintaining their high level of skill and quality. And it's just something where you just need to understand that, like with capoeira, there's a lot of things that are kind of foreign to the body in terms of like the stresses that we put on it, these weird movements, twisting, and just like weird, directions of force. So appreciating that, like there's a lot of overuse injuries.
Yeah.
The low back stuff, I've had that for such a long time, and just appreciate that. This is something where you will get injured if you do it too much, just like anything, right? If you run too much, you're going to have an overuse injury. If you lift too much, you're going to have overuse injuries. So just maintain the balance and then figure out your system of getting the most benefit from it without killing yourself. And for that, I think you need to be able to supplement your skill practice with movement practice that's meant to maintain the body. And I think there's different degrees of it too. So I think there's the highest intensity stuff and there's the lowest intensity stuff. So myself as an example, I've been on a little bit of a hiatus in training because I just moved down to Austin within the last 2 years, and working in the fitness industry, it's especially like running my own business, it's very hard to, build up your clientele in a new place, especially a place that's so saturated like Austin. So a lot of my focus has gone there, but then also too, the times that classes are being held is generally when I'm working.
Yeah.
So my capoeira training has really gone down. And this year I'm finally at a place where I'm like, all right, great. Like I'm coming back, I can train and I can really give myself to it and like be a part of the Austin capoeira community again. And
I had the same experience when I was running CrossFit gym too.
Yeah.
It's like fluctuation of time and energy.
Yeah. It's all about finding the right, like tweaking the right levels of everything so that you can kind of find that sweet spot and you kind of find harmony in your life. And I've been working on that, and I think I'm got a good spot. So I'm really looking forward to come back to capoeira this year and coming back very strong. But going into it, like I've learned enough in my time that like I'm going slow.
Yeah.
I'm in a training program that I just put together for myself, and I'm leading into the summer where there's a lot of capoeira events, and I just want to be in good form for them and just feel good and just like support my body as I do that stuff. But to do that, I'm going very low in terms of the capoeira starting out, and I'm going to bring the skill work back in gradually over time. But right now, it's just about building my body back to a place where I really know it's going to support me. And so a lot of that looks like a lot of heavy lifting that's pointed towards building me up for the movements of capoeira, and at the same time doing sort of the opposite of that and going to a lot of yoga classes. I'm trying to incorporate a lot of the sort of the softer, more gentle type of skill work that just is good for the body and kind of gets tension out of the body, because that tension can hold, and it's like a pulley lever system. It's almost like a truss system, right? So there's this idea of tensegrity that's thrown around, and it's this idea of like this structure of just kind of like, you can imagine like a bunch of different sticks being held together in this sphere by like rubber bands. If some of those rubber bands get way too tight, then it just warps the structure. So just releasing that tension and having that balance to complement some of the tension that we build up from the strength and conditioning, and appreciating that we need that aspect of it. But I'm trying to be very, very intelligent coming back into it, and understanding that if I just went back into training capoeira 5 days a week, I'd probably be wrecked within a month or two.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the other interesting thing that I want to point out too is so your nickname in capoeira is Gafanhoto, which means grasshopper, and you kind of like implemented that into your business.
Yeah.
Right? Tell us a little bit about that, because that's going to lead me into my next point that I discussed a little bit with Master Pingafogo. But let us know kind of like where we can find you, your fitness name and business and all that kind of stuff.
Currently, my training business and nutrition coaching business is Grasshopper Fitness and Nutrition Coaching. And that all started from me when I was working at a gym. I was training all the time. I was working with clients, and I was doing a lot of capoeira. And then I just had an opportunity where I could branch out on my own, and I could get my own space, renting at a gym, and just basically run my own business, working with clientele. So I did that, and I started my business. And at the time, I was looking for names and just trying to figure out. And I don't know. I mean, there's so many dumb, stupid fitness names out there today. And then I was just kind of playing with the idea. Well, it's like, I'm Gafanhoto, I'm Grasshopper, I'm like, it kind of makes sense. So I just texted some people. My girlfriend actually was like, why don't you just Grasshopper Fitness? And I was like, I don't know, it sounds kind of dumb. And then, but that when it stuck around.
Yeah. And
so I ran with it a little bit, and I texted some people. So it just started that way, and then it became Grasshopper Fitness.
It's a cool bridge of identity also.
It is.
Right?
And it's interesting because it all goes back to how much capoeira really gave me a lot, and is still so intertwined with my life. But since that time, it's kind of developed a little bit, and it's, there's some certain imagery that comes along with this idea of the grasshopper, and like, everybody knows like, the young grasshopper as that expression, like relative to martial arts, and it's always been kind of indicative of like my approach to life, and like just being very much a student mindset. So it just works, and I'm kind of running with it. This year, it's changing. It's going to be Grasshopper Strength and Wellness. I'm going to go and begin working with a lot more companies and small businesses.
Oh, cool.
And
like wellness program type stuff.
Yeah, I'm building some wellness programs based around nutrition coaching, and throwing in some of the movement stuff as well, and just trying to open up people's minds to how important maintaining their bodies are in a work environment, because they're the people that I see that get it already, but there's so many people that are just kind of wrapped up in their life and their work, and I think they need a little bit more. So that's really the next thing. Grasshopper Strength and Wellness is going to be happening this year, and just partnering up with smaller companies and businesses. If you want to find out more about some of the stuff I'm doing, I just have a website. It's myfriendthegrasshopper.com, and you can learn a little bit about what I do with clients here in Austin. That's going to be changing. I also have a podcast of my own called the Moving Thought Podcast.
That's actually how I came across your website, was through your podcast.
Oh, really? Cool. Yeah. And that's something that's just kind of like a side project. I just have a bunch of fitness and health, wellness entrepreneurs come on and just kind of talk about like getting people to move better, or just like whatever life lessons they can share. Because I find a lot of people that are out there making it on their own, they're very they're learning a lot, and they have a lot to share. So a bunch of really cool conversations that way. That's pretty much it. I actually got off social media recently, just sort of as an experiment. So I'm not on Instagram, and I rarely use Facebook anymore, but people are welcome to reach out to me there. Colin Van Ert, if you want to just friend me on Facebook and see what's up. Probably won't respond for a while, but you're still welcome to be my friend.
So kind of like to segue into what I had talked about with Master Pingo Fogo, and I see like you're on your way to setting this up for yourself. Perhaps if you want to get back into teaching capoeira too, is like, just teaching capoeira classes as a form of like career or job is very hard.
Totally.
Renting space and stuff like that. So I'm in the mindset that you need to have some kind of, secondary job or business or goal or entrepreneurship. And the fitness thing that you have going on right now in nutrition coaching is so uniquely correlated with capoeira that you can build like a really good business for yourself in the future should you incorporate more capoeira and teaching capoeira.
Yeah.
I see the same thing as like Contramestre Mechido was like really forward thinking and trying to combine these two unique businesses,
right?
One to support the other, because I think his CrossFit gym supports more of the capoeira than vice versa.
Yeah,
and I think it's important for people who are starting out to teaching capoeira to try to utilize some of their personal skill also, and kind of build like a cohesive endeavor with some other product that you can also give to the capoeirista, or so you're not just relying on teaching capoeira a couple times a week. You're like the starving artist type of thing. It's like work smarter, not harder.
100%. Yeah, and you see so many of these amazing mestres who are just struggling.
Yeah,
and it's really unfortunate because they're so good at what they do and they've spent their whole life giving themselves to this art, but and then they just struggle financially.
Yeah.
So it's a really hard thing to do, especially capoeira. It's obscure and it's exotic, and it's not like opening up a CrossFit gym where it has brand recognition.
Right.
It's very challenging. So I've always felt pretty fortunate that I found a way of like housing all of my interests within a career path. But I think if somebody really wants to give themselves to capoeira lifestyle, like make it, a piece of this greater picture that you're building, and like make it cohesive. So I think whether conscious or unconsciously, that's always been in my mind as I've been going forward in fitness. Is like, well, I'm staying here because this allows me to do all the other things that I'm really interested in, and capoeira being one of them. So if somebody's really into capoeira and they're trying to figure out a way of doing that, then just be intelligent about ways of being business minded. Don't have these poor conceptions of what it's going to be like. If you're just doing capoeira, it's going to be very hard to support yourself. But that's not to say maybe you can't put a community together. Maybe you can't have a martial arts studio where capoeira is an aspect of it, and you team up with another group of people, and then all of a sudden, the capoeira class maybe isn't supporting you itself, but your membership of 200 people at this martial arts facility is, where you have BJJ and you have Muay Thai classes, and then you just have more community. So I'm a really big believer in synergy and finding things that work together, bringing people together. The more people you can bring together to work on something, the more you can grow and build. So I definitely agree that that's something that you have to be very conscious of, and something that you're doing a great job of with everything that you have going on right now.
Yeah, the Capoeira Connection.com was kind of it was like an exploration project, like an experiment that I was just I was trying to figure out a way, because I've always struggled with the idea of just doing capoeira for a living, and it's like a passion and I love doing it. But sometimes it doesn't offer you the means to the quality of life that you want to live, especially when you're starting a family, things like that. I mean, that's a big responsibility. And so I always try to think a little bit outside the box in form of like, not just making money with capoeira, but creating like an environment and like a place that also gives back. So my initial thought was, why don't I try to build kind of like an e-commerce platform where people can get authentic products from Brazil, but don't have to wait for international shipping.
Yeah.
And so I found a mastery in Brazil that I decided to start working with, at least for the beginning part, of like importing berimbau's and selling them online. And I've sold many all over the United States, shipping them all over the place. And so that's been really cool. But from that initial idea spawned many other things like this podcast. And I was like, wow, why don't I host this podcast on the website because, you know, again, the podcast and I think I've almost over explained this, but it's, you know, it's like, it was my way of continued education for myself, but then I wanted to extend that to everyone else.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't that I started the podcast because I have a lot of things to say about capoeira. No, I want to hear what other people have to say about that.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've been fortunate enough to utilize some skills that I've learned through like web design and marketing and things like that to put this kind of you know, business model together, and as a form of me to better work with capoeira as a lifestyle and as a career. You know, it's kind of like one of the explorations that I'm doing right now, and it's been great, man. Just like I've had a lot of really good feedback from the community, which at first I thought it would have a lot of adversity.
You know, really?
Yeah.
I thought this would be fully supported, like, really? And I'm sure it has been.
Yeah, I think that's just my own like insecurity.
Yeah, it's a little
I'm
bit
more
of
worried.
resistance.
Yeah, I'm more worried about you know the I guess like the criticism from people. You know.
Yeah.
Because that's not something that I'm like new to, you know, and I see it with other people who try to, oh man, this guy's not qualified to do this, and why is he doing that? And I mean, I've seen that kind of thing in the capoeira community, and I was like, man, do I really want to like dip my toe in that water?
I think there's so much. There's so much variability in the capoeira community that it's not structured like in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Every school has the same belt system. That belt system, there's like an international federation that like regulates all that stuff. It's so displaced. So I think there's a lot of people that are trying to prove their legitimacy in capoeira, and so that there's definitely some of that like imposter syndrome. I deal with that all the time. Like, man, Graduado, I gotta like live up to these standards, but like, you know, like these, I still like gotta play by their rules and make sure everybody's cool. There's a lot of like weird sort of politics and capoeira, but I think at the end of the day, like there's something that draws everyone to it and draws like a specific type of person to this art form. And I wish that we could get some of that stuff out of the way and just be like, you know, let's just enjoy this capoeira thing and like let's not be judgmental. But I think people really will support this thing, and it's great too. Like I'm surprised that I'm not surprised, but it's cool that there's now a capoeira podcast coming out, and I think it's so great because the community is so integrated. Like, you know, we hadn't really met before you came back to Austin, but you know, even so, like how many capoeiristas have we met on our path that we both know? And so it's a tight knit community, and like, you know, you're going to start to travel and stuff. And I think this will be really cool because you're going to have an opportunity to have some really amazing guests on here. Yeah,
I'm excited, man. It's been cool. I mean, we just I guess we released, I don't know, maybe it's been a week and a half, something, the episode number 4 with Mestre Pinga Fogo, and I think we've gotten over 7,000 hits.
No way.
Yeah, it's been really cool, man.
That's incredible.
And I'm trying to learn how to like, you know, measure the metrics on iTunes and YouTube and on the capoeiraconnection.com and stuff like that. So this year is like a definite, I want to focus a lot more on growing the site and marketing that, because it's funny. It's like, I'm really into it, but almost nobody else knows about it. And it's like, how do I get other people to know about it? You know, so using Facebook and social media and all that kind of stuff, and trying to turn like an experimental project into more of like a sustaining endeavor.
That's great,
so to speak, something like that. So, yeah, man, I'm really excited to reconnect with you, and hope you get a chance to just come train with us. I tell everybody, and also just to kind of let the public know, we have at Contramestre Mechido's studio, Capoeira Evolução, here in Austin, Texas. Every Thursday night at 7:30, we do open rodas. They're, you know, generally it's mostly our students, but we always have people dropping in. So you're more than welcome. Everybody's welcome to come in. And then another thing that I've been trying to organize with a lot of the teachers here. So we have in Austin right now, currently teaching classes. We have Contramestre Mechido. We have Contramestre Esquilo with Capoeira Luanda. We have Mestre Pinga Fogo. We have Estagiário Caju of Capoeira Candeias. We have a Godzilla of Capoeira Aluae.
Okay.
And then there's a few other Capoeira Angola groups. So there's a lot of capoeira, and I've been trying to get a hold of like the kind of the leaders of those communities and do open rodas every month in a different location. And our first one that we did in January was awesome. Contra Mestre Esquilo hosted it.
Yep.
And we had a bunch of the people come out. We had probably, 30, 40 something people come to the whole day. And it was a huge success. It was really cool. And in February, we're going to start doing one. The next one's going to be hosted with Mestre Pingafogo. And we'll start with a workshop and then end with a roda. And then we'll see what, March and April and May have in store. So
that's exciting, man.
Really cool,
that's
man.
great. I really do appreciate you and everything you're doing to bring the community together. I think it's huge. That's a big thing for me is I think there's kind of two directions people go with capoeira. Either, it's all about us or it's all about everybody. And I think the idea of bringing everyone together is just going to help the community so much more.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Dude, it's been great talking to you. I can't wait to have you back on, man.
Yeah, this is awesome. We really appreciate you having me today.
Cool. All right. Gafanhoto, Capoeira Nago.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, guys.